The night in Eldershade had always been marked by an unsettling silence, as if something lurking in the shadows was watching every movement. The town, hidden between dark mountains and covered by dense forests, harbored secrets no one dared to uncover. Among them, the most sinister was the cemetery known as the Ossuary of Shadows, a place everyone avoided, where the mist never seemed to lift, and the ancient graves were covered by a thick layer of moss, as if nature itself was trying to hide something terrible. Legend said that restless souls waited there for those brave, or foolish, enough to cross its rusty gates. Clara, a young woman with a skeptical spirit, had arrived in town to spend some time with her aunt, Margaret. Unlike the superstitious locals, she didn't believe in ghost stories or ancient curses. Coming from a bustling metropolis full of life and noise, she thought the town was just another rural place, full of tales invented to scare children and tourists. Since she was little, Clara had prided herself on not being shaken by fear, and it was exactly that confidence that pushed her to explore the cemetery that haunted the people of Eldershade. That night, a dense fog hung over the empty streets. Clara, with her flashlight in hand, left her aunt's house and walked toward the cemetery, driven by a curiosity that blended challenge with a desire to prove none of it was real. The rusty gate creaked eerily as she pushed it open, as though it hadn't been touched in a long time. As soon as she entered, the air around her seemed to change. It became colder, denser, as if filled with an invisible, yet undeniably real presence. She ignored the chill down her spine and continued, her footsteps echoing among the forgotten tombstones. With each step, Clara felt the weight of something ancient, something that seemed to watch her from every corner. The wind whispered through the gnarled trees, carrying murmurs she couldn't understand. It was as if the cemetery itself were alive, breathing around her, with an unseen force enveloping her. The path led her to the center of the graveyard, where an old mausoleum stood, imposing and covered in ivy. The iron door was corroded and appeared to have been forced open from the inside, as if something had tried to escape. The worn plaque at the entrance bore a name Clara recognized from old conversations: Isadora Blake. Isadora Blake was a legend in Eldershade. She had died 100 years ago, accused of witchcraft and practicing dark magic. It was believed that upon being buried, she had cursed the cemetery, trapping her own soul there to wander eternally among the dead. Clara, however, scoffed at these stories. With a sigh of defiance, she pushed the door of the mausoleum, which gave way with a crash, revealing a dark, icy interior. As soon as she entered, Clara immediately felt the air grow heavier. The stone floor was covered in dust, except for a path leading to a crypt. It was as if someone, or something, had passed through there recently. She followed the narrow corridor, illuminating the walls covered in strange, disturbing symbols. When she reached the end, she found a large urn in the center of the room, surrounded by extinguished candles and dead flowers. On top of the urn, there was a staircase descending even further, leading to an underground crypt. Each step she descended seemed to pull her down, as if the very ground were trying to grab her. When she finally reached the bottom, the darkness was so thick that her flashlight barely illuminated more than a few feet ahead. In the middle of the crypt, a lone headstone stood, covered in mysterious symbols. Engraved on it was the name Isadora Blake. Then Clara felt it. It wasn't the cold of the cemetery, or the absolute silence. It was something else, a presence that slowly approached, as if just awakening from a deep sleep. She felt a cold breeze brush against her face, though there was no wind down there. Clara's heart raced, and though she tried to convince herself it was all in her mind, something inside her screamed otherwise. Suddenly, a soft, almost imperceptible laugh echoed through the crypt. She turned, but no one was there. "Did you come to set me free?" The soft, yet eerie voice seemed to come from all directions at once. Terror gripped Clara. Trying to keep her composure, she shouted, "Who's there?" Her voice echoed off the stone walls, but the response came only in another whisper, closer now. "I've been waiting for so long." The voice sounded like a lament, as though the speaker had been trapped for centuries. Clara stepped back, but as she did, she stepped on something soft. When she looked down, she saw that the ground was covered in fresh soil, as if someone had just dug there. A sudden gust of wind blew through the crypt, extinguishing her flashlight. The place was plunged into absolute darkness, and then she saw it. From within the darkness, a figure began to form. Isadora Blake, with her tangled black hair and skin pale as death, hovered before her. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, and her mouth twisted into a macabre smile. "Now that you're here, you can free me," the figure said in a voice that was a deathly whisper. Clara tried to run, but her feet were stuck. Something cold and invisible wrapped around her ankles, preventing any movement. The shadows around her seemed to come alive, crawling up her legs, draining her energy. Clara's breathing grew heavy. The air around her seemed to disappear, while Isadora's specter drew closer and closer. "You will take my place," Isadora murmured, extending a bony hand toward Clara. The young woman felt a searing pain course through her body, as if her very life were being ripped from her. The shadows wrapped around her arms, tightening, draining her strength. The smile on Isadora's face was now one of pure satisfaction. Clara tried to scream, but her voice was smothered by the darkness. Everything around her began to spin, and in a final gasp, she felt her body being dragged into the ground. The next day, the people of Eldershade found only Clara's notebook, abandoned on the ground beside Isadora Blake's gravestone. There was no sign of her, as if she had never existed. The stories about the Ossuary of Shadows grew even darker. They said that on foggy nights, a new voice could be heard among the graves, calling to those who dared cross the gates. Now, Clara was part of the ossuary, forever trapped, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to challenge the cursed cemetery. The ossuary chose its guardians, and once you entered, you never left.